Imagine standing on the banks of the River Thames near Reading, just a short train ride from the bustling heart of modern London. Today, it is a picturesque scene of weeping willows and rowing clubs. But if you had stood in this exact spot in March of 1896, you would have witnessed a horror that would stain the Victorian era forever. A bargeman named David Beatty was navigating his craft through the murky waters when he spotted a brown paper parcel snagged in the reeds. He fished it out, expecting perhaps some discarded clothing or household waste. Instead, as the wet paper tore away, he saw the small, pale foot of a child. This discovery was the first thread pulled in a tapestry of terror that would reveal the dark, hidden industry of baby farming. This is a journey through the shadows of Victorian England, where the most vulnerable members of society were turned into a commodity, and where one woman in particular would become the most prolific serial killer in British history. To understand how such a thing could happen, we have to look past the velvet curtains and polished silver of the Victorian upper class and peer into the desperate reality of the poor. During the 19th century, the social stigma surrounding what they called illegitimate children was absolute. Under the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834, the fathers of children born out of wedlock were effectively absolved of financial responsibility. The entire burden fell on the mother. For a domestic servant or a factory worker, having a child without a husband didn't just mean social ruin, it meant starvation. These women were desperate to keep their jobs and their reputations, and it was this desperation that created a market for baby farmers. If you look at the classified sections of newspapers from the 1880s, you will see innocuous-looking advertisements. They read like this: married couple with no family would adopt a healthy child. Nice country home. Terms, £10. It sounded like a lifeline. For a lump sum, a woman could hand over her child to someone who promised to raise it as their own. But behind these friendly notices lay a predatory business model. The baby farmers would take the money, often the mother's entire life savings, and then they had a financial incentive to ensure the child did not survive. If the child died quickly, the farmer kept the entire fee without the cost of food or care. It was a system that practically invited murder. Our journey takes us next to the bustling streets of Bristol, where a woman named Amelia Dyer was honing her craft. Dyer had trained as a nurse, a profession that gave her a veneer of respectability and a chilling knowledge of how to manage life and death. She realized early on that she didn't need to feed the children entrusted to her. She could simply let them fade away. She used a popular Victorian concoction known as Mother's Friend, which was essentially syrup laced with opium. It would keep the babies quiet, suppressing their appetite, until they eventually succumbed to malnutrition, or what doctors at the time would conveniently label as debility or convulsions. For years, Dyer operated in the shadows, moving from town to town whenever the local authorities grew suspicious. But eventually, the sheer number of deaths in her care became impossible to ignore. In 1879, she was sentenced to 6 months of hard labor for neglect. You might think this would be the end of her story, but for the victims of the Victorian age, justice was rarely so simple. After her release, Dyer didn't stop. She simply became more efficient. She realized that involving doctors to sign death certificates was too risky. From then on, she decided she would dispose of the bodies herself. This is where the story shifts from neglect to active, cold-blooded murder. Think about the psychological toll of this trade. Dyer was a grandmother herself. She would often present herself as a loving, maternal figure to the terrified young mothers who arrived at her door. She would offer them tea, tell them their child would be loved, and then, as soon as the mother was out of sight, she would reach for her roll of white dressmaker's tape. If you visit the town of Reading today, you can walk along the Kennet and Avon Canal. It's a peaceful place, but in 1896, this was Amelia Dyer's dumping ground. After that first parcel was found by the bargeman, the police began a frantic search. When they finally traced the paper back to Dyer, they raided her home. The smell inside was said to be the overwhelming scent of human decomposition masked by heavy heaps of disinfectant. They found stacks of baby clothes, letters from pleading mothers asking for news of their children, and more of that white tape. When the police eventually dragged the river near her home, they pulled up 7 more parcels. Each contained a child,
and each child had that same white tape wrapped twice around its neck and tied in a knot. Dyer famously remarked to the officers that the tape was how you could tell they were hers. This wasn't just the work of one madwoman, though. To truly understand the scale of this, we have to travel to Brixton in South London. Long before Dyer was caught, another woman named Margaret Waters became the first baby farmer to be hanged in 1870. Waters operated with a similar ruthlessness, often taking in multiple infants at once and keeping them in horrific conditions. The public outcry following her trial led to the first real attempt at regulation, the Infant Life Protection Act of 1872. But as we see with Dyer's later crimes, the law had no teeth. It required the registration of any house that took in more than one infant for more than 24 hours, but baby farmers simply lied, moved frequently, or only took one child at a time to stay under the radar. It makes you wonder how many thousands of children were lost to this industry across the entire country. History often focuses on the big names like Jack the Ripper, but the baby farmers were arguably far more dangerous because they operated with the silent permission of a hypocritical society. The people who paid the fees often knew deep down that their children weren't going to a better life. They were paying for the problem to go away. The Victorian era was obsessed with the appearance of morality, and baby farming was the grim mechanism that maintained that appearance for those who had strayed. When Amelia Dyer finally stood trial at the Old Bailey, it took the jury only 6 minutes to find her guilty. She was hanged at Newgate Prison, a site you can still visit today, though the prison itself is gone, replaced by the Central Criminal Court. Her execution was a national sensation, but the real legacy of her crimes wasn't the hanging. It was the absolute shift in how society viewed child welfare. The horror of the Reading baby murders forced the government to finally pass strict laws that turned the informal, dangerous trade of baby farming into the regulated systems of adoption and foster care we recognize today. If you travel to these sites now, from the back streets of Bristol to the quiet canals of Reading, you won't find many plaques or monuments to the victims of baby farming. These were the children of the invisible poor, the ones history often tries to forget. But their story is a vital part of the landscape. It reminds us that the grand architecture and industrial progress of the Victorian age were built on a foundation of extreme inequality. It's a dark chapter of travel through time, showing us that the most important landmarks aren't always the palaces or the cathedrals, but the places where society was forced to confront its own soul. The next time you find yourself by a quiet English waterway or walking through the old districts of a Victorian city, remember the white tape and the paper parcels. Remember that progress often comes at a terrible price, and that the laws we take for granted today were written in the blood of those who had no voice. This history is a testament to the fact that we must always look beneath the surface of the places we visit, because even the most beautiful locations can hold the darkest secrets. If you found this deep dive into the hidden history of England compelling, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more journeys into the shadows of the past. Let me know in the comments if there are other dark historical sites you'd like us to explore. Until next time, keep looking closer, because history is everywhere.